Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? Stuart here from Spain Speaks, coming to you again here from my garden. Hopefully we're not going to get any stray cats wandering around in the background today. Another overcast day in Madrid, as you can see, possibly to coincide with the confinements that were announced yesterday by the regional government here in this part of the world. So bad weather confinements, what more can we ask for? Now the first thing I'm going to do today is blink a few times. Just because people say that I don't blink during those videos and therefore they're getting a bit suspicious that maybe I'm not a real human being. I could be some type of alien coming to you today because I don't blink. So I'll just get that out of the way first of all. Now on to the main topic of conversation today, obviously the confinement that was announced yesterday, or the selective confinement as one newspaper calls it here in the Madrid community. The population was waiting yesterday with bated breath to see exactly what was going to happen here in this part of the world. And of course, yesterday afternoon around 5 or 6 p.m., the president of the Madrid community came out and announced what they were going to do in order to get the health situation in this part of Spain under control. Different neighborhoods in Madrid city, especially some of the ones in the southern part of the city, and there are also various cities and towns around Madrid that are also going to form part of this selective confinement. Places like Alcobendas in the north of the city and places like Parla in the south of the city. So different areas, as I said, 37 specific areas, some 13% of the population, and about 850,000 people in total affected by these confinements. And basically what it means is that people can't come in and out of these areas, and all of the business activity in these particular areas is also going to be restricted. Now my particular area where I am here in Residency, Madrid, which is in the southeast of the city, about 20 kilometers away from the center of Madrid, we haven't been confined. Things here are going to operate as normal. So that's good news from my personal point of view. And also the areas in Madrid where I have friends haven't been affected either. But there are lots of people in this area that have family in some of the parts of Madrid that have been confined. And of course, they are not allowed to go in and visit their parents, visit their relatives, unless of course it is a force majeure. Now, needless to say that the people in these areas that are going to be confined as of Monday, remember that these restrictions are coming into place on Monday, not today or tomorrow, but Monday. Some people say that they're being discriminated against by the government, and they're not happy about that. Of course, as we have mentioned in recent times, a lot of areas that are going into the confinement situation are in the poorer working class neighborhoods, and of course lots of immigrants in those neighborhoods as well. And some of the newspapers here are calling them ghetto neighborhoods, so a bit despective with their words. And the government has come out and said today that part of the reasons why case numbers are so high in these particular areas is because people just got too relaxed about the situation, started to socialize, forgot about social distancing, and now we can see the problems that that has caused. And unfortunately back into a lockdown situation. Now the big question turns to what happens next. What happens if these selective confinements or selective lockdowns don't work? What's going to happen? Is the whole city going to be confined? Is the whole region going to be confined? Those are the questions that people are asking themselves today. What's going to happen next? Now I saw somebody in the comment section saying that I should put on my tinfoil hat and recognize some of the theories that were going around before that said that the country was going to go back into a lockdown mid-September. Well, the fact of the matter is that the country is not in lockdown at the moment. The borders are still open. You can still cross the borders into France. You can still cross the borders into Portugal. Only parts of the country are being locked down. As I said, it's only parts of the city of Madrid. In this area here, I'm as free as a bird. So obviously those rumors that were flying around that the whole country was going to be locked down on September the 18th were not true. So therefore, I'm not going to acknowledge it. Now, changing the topic slightly, my son went back to school this week. He started school again on Thursday, and as parents, we were a little bit anxious about the situation, of course. I'm sure that I'm not the only parent in the world who is anxious about this situation, but he went back to school. He started a new school this year, so he had that added anxiety on top of everything else at the moment, but things went reasonably well. The school seemed to handle the situation well. They organized different doors and different gates and different access points for the students to go into and come out of. He's only allowed to mix with other kids at the school who are in his bubble, meaning kids from his class. They're not allowed to mix with other classes, not allowed to mix with other years, not allowed to mix with other kids at recess times. So that is one of the things that the school is doing, creating these bubbles in order to keep the health risks at a minimum. But it's only 2 days, so we'll see what the situation is like in 2 weeks' time, in 2 months' time, and if it gets worse or if it stays the same. I don't know what other kids are like, but my son is rather cautious when it comes to this whole health crisis. He washes his hands more than normal. He tries to keep away from other kids. He tries to maintain a social distance. So he seems to be aware of what he needs to do in order to avoid catching the virus. But as I said, early days yet. Now, still a lot of talk in the comment section about the different foods here in Spain, people sharing their tapas experience, people saying that they've only had terrible tapas, some people saying that they have had fantastic dining experiences in Spain. And the topic of conversation turned to, how do you find a good place to eat in Spain? Well, it's a lot easier nowadays, of course, with social media. You can always check Google for people's reviews. You can check TripAdvisor. But the problem with those places, as we know, is that they become very, very crowded. The more popular a place is on TripAdvisor, the more difficult it can be to get a table. And personally, I prefer to keep my TripAdvisor use to a minimum. And sometimes you can come across fantastic places that have only just recently opened up. Maybe it's also recently changed ownership, and you can get a pleasant dining experience. However, that method can be a bit hit and miss here in Madrid, for example, because there's so many different places, there's so many places to eat, restaurants, bars, tabernas, so many different places, and of course, as I said, it can be a little bit hit and miss. But I'd say that in general, over the years, my dining experiences have been more positive than negative. For example, over the last couple of months, we've been to different cities in Spain. We went to Ponferrada in the north of the country. We went to León as well. We went to some places in Galicia, in Lugo. And normally after a few years here, you can tell which places are going to be good and which places are going to be bad. In León, we found very good places. We also found some good places in Ponferrada without having to go to TripAdvisor. When we went to Lugo, we also found a good place there. So you can find some really good places to eat on the fly, but it pays not to be too fussy. Now, there's also been a lot of talk in recent times about the residency card here in Spain, what it is, how you get it, what's the difference between the NIE number and the TIE card, and what the situation is going to be like for people from the UK now that you are leaving the European Union, how that residency situation in Spain is going to change. Now, I've always been a non-EU resident, of course, coming from Australia. I've always had to go through the non-European residency process. I started off getting a temporary residence in this country. I think it was for 1 year. Then I renewed. I got a 2-year residence. And then I think after that you get a 5-year residence, and you have to renew it every 5 years. However, when it comes to renewing that residency after the 5-year period, you also have to prove that you have been living continuously in the country for the last 5 years. Now, how I do that is I have to show my passport. I have to make a photocopy of every page in my passport, and I present that with the other documents, and that proves that I haven't left the country or been living outside the country for a long period of time during those 5 years. Yes, you can go for a holiday back to Australia. You can spend a few weeks in another country. You could probably even spend up to a couple of months. But of course, you have to prove that you haven't lived or been a resident in another place during those 5 years. So that's fundamental in order to get that renewed. And as I said, you have to show your passport or some other proof that you've been living continuously here, that you haven't been living in Australia, for example, in that period or in another part of the world. So that's also fundamental. And another interesting fact is that when you have been a resident for more than 10 years, you can apply to become a Spanish citizen. Now, that's not as easy as it seems, because in my particular case, I have to renounce my Australian citizenship because Spain doesn't recognize dual nationality. Now, I know that there are ways to get around that. People still hold on to their Australian one when they have their Spanish one, but it can get a little bit complicated. For example, my son has both his Spanish and his Australian, but apparently when he's 18, he has to choose one or the other. And we have had some complications coming into the country. A couple of years ago we came back into Spain with an expired Spanish passport, and also his DNI card had expired as well, and it wasn't easy to get through customs. They didn't want to let him into the country as an Australian citizen. They said that if he did come into the country he'd have to leave in 3 months. So it got a little bit complicated, and we ended up having to go to the police station at the airport to sort everything out. So having dual citizenship when the other country is not recognized can be a bit of a problem. And of course, if you do decide to become a Spanish citizen, you're going to have to do a test. You're going to have to do a language test. I think they look for a level A2, and you're also going to have to do a test that shows your socio-cultural knowledge of this country. The good news is that it's not very difficult, but you have to know certain things. You're probably going to have to know how politics works in this country. You're going to have to know some things about Spanish culture, and you might even have to know about Spanish geography. But as I said, it's not difficult and you can study for it. And again, when it comes to language skills, you only need a level A2, which is a pre-intermediate level of the Spanish language, which is fairly simple in my opinion. Simple verbs, simple vocabulary. You'd have to be able to string a simple sentence together to get that A2 level. But as I said, you can study for it, so that could be an option for people that want to get more of a permanent base here in Spain, take out that Spanish citizenship. On that note, I'll start to wrap the video up. Questions and comments, please leave them in the section below. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. See you in the next one. Hasta luego.